You're listening to Sip and Grow the podcast, the show where we taste awesome, delicious wines while having unfiltered conversations about our passions, experiences, struggles, entrepreneurship, and life. My name is Nicole Di Pasquale, and I'm a wine enthusiast just trying to pursue her passions and dreams while taking you on the journey with me, one episode at a time. My ultimate goal is to not only bring you wine knowledge and value, but also inspire you to enjoy your process and journey in pursuing your passions and dreams. Because guess what? The person you become while enduring the process is more important. So sit back, grab a glass, and let's sip and grow together. Welcome back to another episode of Sip and Grow with me, your host, Nicole Di Pasquale. So I wanted to go off. I did an episode on Chianti, and today is the day that we are going to talk about Chianti Classico. So I want to clear something up. In that Chianti episode, I forgot to mention I was so excited to talk to you guys about wine and all the details and differences between Chianti and Chianti Classico that I forgot to mention the most important difference between the two. So, to start this off, I just want to say that the major difference between a Chianti and a Chianti Classico is that the Chianti wine is made of, it has to be made of at least 70% the Sangiovese grape, and then a Chianti Classico has to have at least 80% of the Sangiovese grape, which is the most common difference. Not to say that all the other things I told you aren't important, but that's like the main thing. And I realized once I finished filming the episode that I forgot to mention that, and it was in my notes. But anyways, I was like, it's fine. I will let them know in the Chianti Classico episode. So here we are. We have made it. You have made it. I'm excited because if you don't know, I did study abroad in Florence, and Florence is within Tuscany. So this wine is very near and dear to my heart. And I will always love Chiantis and Chianti Classicos because they're just delicious and amazing, and the place is amazing. So if you want to visit, highly recommend. But anyways, this wine, today we're doing a Chianti Classico, and I stumbled across this wine in Bottle Barn, which is the Total Wine of West Coast. And usually when I buy wines, I just buy it to try it, and then I research them after at home. In this case, when I got home, I started looking up the producer and looking into it, and it's a pretty cool story. So the guy who created, or the producer and owner of this vineyard, his name is Diego Finocchi. And he decided, he studied wine, enology and viniculture. He did all that, studied that, and wanted to be a winemaker. So in 2006, he was 24, and he bought land from an old farmer. He bought it was 12 acres, more or less, from this old farmer, and created what is now called L'Erta di Radda. So that's the name of his vineyard, L'Erta di Radda. And he is, obviously, this is a Chianti Classico. So usually Chianti Classicos fall within the historic part of the Chianti area, right? So the specific area that he's located at is Radda. It's spelled Radda. And he decided to call it L'Erta because Erta in Italian means acclivity, which is upward slope. And that's the land that he bought is basically in an upward slope. So very simple. He named it L'Erta di Radda, which is the area that he's located in. And what was cool about this guy is He's a 24-year-old, bought his own land because he's like, I'm gonna make some wine because that's what I'm passionate about. So let me buy this land and start making some wine. And then in 2009, he created his first Chianti Classico. This is not the 2009 one. I wish it was. But from then on, he has been creating Chianti Classicos left and right. And he does produce other wines. But of course, the most famous one in that region would be Chianti Classicos. So this one happens to be a 2020 vintage. And I kind of wanted, before getting into this wine, I wanted to talk to you guys about the classifications of Chianti Classico. So Chianti Classico, the major differences between a Chianti and a Chianti Classico is that the Chianti usually tends to be either, like, it has to have a minimum of 70% of the Sangiovese grape, and then a Chianti Classico has to have a minimum of 80% of the Sangiovese grape. So usually within these, like a Chianti or Chianti Classico, the blends of like grapes that they use to finish the wine basically would either, they use the grape like a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Syrah, a Merlot, or a Canaiolo or Colorino. Those are the 5 grapes that you tend to see within a Chianti or Chianti Classico if it's not 100% the Sangiovese grape. Now, just because they have a minimum doesn't necessarily mean that a Chianti can have, can be made of 100% the Sangiovese grape, or a Chianti Classico can be made of 100% the Sangiovese grape. So these are just little fun facts about what differentiates both of them. And then on top of that, like, you have to, like, the Chianti doesn't really have classifications, but the Chianti Classico does. So the classifications that fall within the Chianti Classico range are, like, let's say we have a little triangle here, right? The bottom layer, which would be like the most basic one, which is actually this one, is called Chianti Classico Annata. So Annata in Italian means vintage. So this is a Chianti Classico vintage. Most basic one. And the only requirements for this is that it's age, it has to have a minimum of 12 months of aging. And that's all that has to happen for it to be required a Chianti Classico Annata. The next one is called Chianti Classico Riserva, which that one has a minimum, it has to be a minimum of 24 months in the aging process. And then the top classification is Chianti Classico Gran Reserva. So that one not only has to be a minimum of 30 months of aging, but also they tend to either select the best grapes in the vineyard, or it comes from a single vineyard, or the grapes come from a single vineyard. So like all the grapes that are made on that specific vineyard are put into the Gran Reserva, whereas some other classifications, the Reserva or the Annata, would be made basically from whatever Sangiovese grapes in that vineyard, and then they might grab another 20% or whatever they're missing, the 10% or the 20% of grapes they're missing, they'll grab from another vineyard. So it's just like higher end. The Gran Reserva is like the top quality one that you can get. But I thought this story was cool because Diego Finocchi, was just someone who was passionate about making wines. He decided to buy some land, started making his own wines, and then boom, created it. His own Chianti Classico in 2009, and then has been thriving ever since. Another thing that you could that differentiates a Chianti and a Chianti Classico is there's like a certain stamp that will be put on the Chianti Classicos, which is like a rooster, and it'll either be put up here or in this case in the back. So this one has it in the back right here. And it just basically, it's a black rooster, and then it has like a red trim that says Chianti Classico. So that's like the certification that this does come from the area that it's supposed to come from. And then of course we have, this is also a DLCG wine, So that means that it falls under all the requirements for the top classification in all of Italy for Italian wines. Which, if you haven't checked out that episode, there's an episode where I explain what these classifications are all about. And if you want to go ahead and see that, go back to that episode. And I go into detail about that. And I also do have a PDF in my link in my bio explaining all things Italian wines if you want to go ahead and check that out. So let's go ahead and open this one up and taste it. So I tend to love Chianti Classicos. Well, Chiantis in general, but Chianti Classicos are one of my favorite, which I'm not sure if I've mentioned this to you guys before, but one of my all-time favorite Chianti Classicos are from a producer called Fontodi. I actually tried that wine in my restaurant management class. Yeah, I had like a restaurant management class in Florence, Italy, and our teacher of that class, he was super nice and would always like talk to us about wines. And he actually got me into one of my favorite wines is Taurasi. And before I left Florence, I actually bought from our restaurant. I bought one of the Taurasi wines we had in stock, and the Fontodi Chianti Classico, which is one of my favorite like Chianti Classicos to drink. They do have different ranges, like they do have the Riserva and the Gran Selezione, but I had the most basic one, and they were both delicious. So these Chianti Classicos can range from anywhere from like $25 to like $80, $90, $100. They are on the pricier side. I think this one was, I'll put it in the description in the notes, but I believe this one cost me like $25, if I'm not mistaken. It might be a little bit cheaper or a little bit more. But I'll go ahead and put it in the notes for this episode. And I'll link the wine just in case you guys want to like read about it or maybe buy it. Wow, this cork is a little bit dry. Let's see how this wine looks today. So usually the most basic Chianti Classico tends to be really like ruby red. And then if you get a Riserva, it could either be really ruby red or like going more towards the garnet, since it's aged a little bit more. Usually if you have an older red wine, it'll be more towards like the garnet color of things. So usually a Riserva or a Gran Reserva will be leaning more towards the garnet colors, and especially like the Gran Reservas, you can look at it and you'll be like, oh snap, this is like 100% garnet color. Oh nice, I got a little bit of whatever this stuff is from the floor in my wine. It's totally fine, we're still gonna try it. I'm gonna take it out because yeah, we don't want to drink that. Anyways, let's go ahead and look at the color real quick. So this is the most basic one, so it should look ruby red, which it does. It's a very nice bright ruby red. And let's go ahead and smell it. Usually Chianti Classicos have a nice balance of like tannins and acidity. They tend to be more on the tannic side of things, but it's overall very like a very balanced wine, which is probably why I really like it, because it's not super intense on the tannins, but it's not super acidic either. It's just the right amount on both ends. So let's go ahead and smell it. Ooh, I'm already getting hints of like licorice. Pepper, cinnamon, vanilla. And I even get that like fresh leather smell. like when you just walk into a leather jacket store and you just get that smell of leather. I'm getting that in here. Which all these components probably come out from it sitting in oak barrels. Those tannins tend to come out either from the grape skins or the oak in the barrel when they're sitting in the barrel for many months they were aged. In this case, this one was probably aged 12 months because that's the minimum requirement of aging for a Chianti Classico. Let's see if it says it back here. No, it doesn't. But I'm pretty sure this one was aged 12 months. Anyways, let's go ahead and taste this. So automatically it's confirming all those like leathery, peppery smells I was getting, but also it's low on the tannins just because it's not like super harsh on the throat. It does go down nicely compared to other Chianti Classicos I've had. And also I'm getting hints of very dark berries. Like I'm getting like cherry, I'm getting blackberry in there even. It's a really, really nice Chianti Classico, and I would say if you're into intense dark wines, like dark berries, and you like that tannic feel of almost like, because this is not too heavy on the tannics, but on the tannins, but it is intense. So if you don't like a dry, like a super dry, intense red wine, you probably won't like this. Like if you're a Pinot Noir lover, you're probably not gonna like this. I tend to like a lot of different wines, so I can appreciate each and every one of them. But I like one of my favorite types of wines tends to be either a Chianti or Chianti Classico. It's not my favorite, but it's one of my favorites. And yeah, I would rate this a solid 9 out of 10. I think it's a really good Chianti Classico. The price point isn't too bad. I'm pretty sure I paid $25 for this, which to be fair, it's a pretty good price range for a Chianti Classico. And I don't know, I may be biased because I lived there and I drank a lot of Chianti Classicos, but I think this is an amazing wine. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions or comments, just, send me a message, DM me, leave me a review. Those would be super helpful for the podcast. And I really hope that you guys drink your wine tonight. And I can't wait to bring you guys another episode. Cheers.